The two most important things a talk should be are, one, it should be true, and two, it should be short. The reason it should be short is that if it's not short, there's no time for question and answer afterwards. And that's much more interesting than the talk, always. The reason for that is understood only by Christian theology. A talk is a monologue. Question and answer is dialogue. Dialogue is closer to trialogue, but trialogue is the nature of ultimate reality. God is a Trinity, and the three persons talk to each other. So we can at least get a little closer to the nature of God in our Q&A, that's dialogue, than in my monologue. So I'm always very impressed with Catholic audiences because they're very patient in listening to monologue because they believe in purgatory. Okay, to get there, we have to be patient. Fine. I'm asked to talk about mercy and justice, specifically God's mercy and justice and how he reconciles them. This sounds like a very abstract and timeless topic. And it is timeless, but it's not abstract. It's very concrete, and it's very practical, and it's very important for us. And it's even a historical topic because it understands, if I am right about it, our place in history. If you look at the difference between our values and the values of previous cultures and our ancestors and earlier times, you don't see two very different ethics. There's never been a culture that says, hurrah for injustice, boo for justice. There has never been a culture that says mercy is wicked, you should avoid it, and cruelty is good, you should have it. Never. But there's been a big difference in emphasis. If you look at our ancestors with your eyes, whoever you are, you're an American and it's in the year 2016. The one thing that strikes you is how cruel and insensitive they are. And if our ancestors looked at us, the one thing that would strike them is how soft and relativistic and spoiled and subjectivistic and weak and wimpy we are. In other words, we're very good at the soft virtues, especially mercy. We're very sensitive, we're very compassionate. But we've forgotten about justice and the hard virtues. Our ancestors were really strong on justice and courage and chastity and all those hard virtues. And they were not nearly as sensitive to the soft virtues. So this issue of mercy and justice is an issue that helps us to understand ourselves and our culture and how it's different. I think everybody's got a plus and a minus, and every culture has a plus and a minus, and every time has a plus and a minus. And from seeing how shockingly cruel our ancestors sometimes seem, and how shockingly soft and spoiled we might seem to them, we might get an insight as to how both times look to God, and how we all have a long way to go. Obviously, we need both. I want to say 8 things. First, I want to talk about the problem, the apparent contradiction between mercy and justice. Second, I'd like to talk about the solution that we would most like to think is true. We sort of like to forget about justice and just talk about mercy. And we don't understand why God's justice demands punishment and demands laws and commandments and even tolerates a thing like hell. If there was any one doctrine in Christianity which I could remove, that would certainly be it. That's the toughest one. Third, I'd like to take a scientific approach. Theology is a science. Different sciences have different data. If you're an anthropologist, you don't use a microscope. And if you're a mathematician, you don't use a telescope. But every science has data, and it tests its beliefs, its theories, its hypotheses by the data. And theology has data. But the instrument that we use to gather our data in theology is not microscopes or telescopes or empirical observation or mathematical calculation. It is faith. Christians believe that God has spoken, above all in Jesus Christ. He has revealed himself. That's data. So you test everything by that data. The theory is tested by the data. The data judge the theory. If the theory If one theory explains more data than another one, you take the theory that explains the more data, the better, and the more clearly, and the more adequately. So let's look at the data. What has God revealed about mercy and justice? Fourth, why God has to be just. Fifth, why he has to be merciful. Sixth, how he reconciles them. Seventh, is one of them prior to the other? And if so, which one and why? And spoiler alert, I'll tell you two of the three answers to that question right away. Yes, one has to be prior, and the one that's prior is mercy. And finally, what does that have to do with us? How should we then live? What difference does that make to our lives? I'm a philosopher, and a lot of philosophers are abstract scholars, and there's a place for that, but I'm impatient with that. I have ADD, so I like philosophers like existentialists and pragmatists who focus on questions that make a difference to your life and to your experience. Especially because I'm getting old and I don't have that much time left, so I don't want to waste time on meaningless stuff. All right, let's first try to define justice and mercy to see why they seem to contradict each other. Justice is, of course, not merely obeying the law or doing what the law says. It's not just legal. There's a natural justice. Everybody understands that. Little kids understand that. Without ever knowing anything about the laws on the law books or even hearing the Ten Commandments, when you do something that's outright unfair, they say, that's unfair. They know that. We instinctively know right and wrong, justice and injustice. So there's a natural justice which is the basis for our legal justice. Why do we make laws that say it's wrong to rape or to murder or to steal? Because we know that it is wrong. Our legal systems reflect an innate, naturally known law, which we call the natural law. Everybody knows that. All right? What about mercy? Well, mercy, just as justice isn't merely legal, mercy isn't merely a feeling. It's not merely the feeling of compassion. It's a very good feeling. But it's not merely a feeling. It's a moral good. And feelings are neutral. No matter what feelings you have, you can be moral. If you feel like strangling your neighbor, that's not a sin. But strangling him is a sin. Mercy is the form that love takes when it confronts evil. And mercy forgives. Mercy does not say, don't worry about it, there's nothing to forgive. When somebody has done you a wrong and they ask for forgiveness, the worst thing you can possibly say is there's nothing to forgive. Because that's a way of saying, I don't forgive you. No, there is something to forgive, and I do forgive you. All right. So, in a sense, mercy presupposes justice. Mercy presupposes that there is right and wrong, and you're not going to take revenge on wrong. If there were no such thing as a real wrong, mercy would be meaningless. Well, our typical niceness and non-judgmentalism then misunderstands both justice and mercy. They're both stronger and harder and more costly than we tend to think. Because justice is real, God can't simply say, don't worry about justice. I love you all. I forgive you all. Do what you want. He can't do that. We'd like him to, but he doesn't. We wish that God hadn't given 10 commandments. We wish he had given 10 suggestions, but he doesn't. In fact, justice is so important that that's why Jesus has to die. I don't fully understand that. I don't think anybody does. The theology of the atonement is one of the great mysteries in Christian theology. There's different theories about it, and they're all helpful, but none of them is the final answer. But somehow or other, the Bible itself says, without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sins. If there's a real debt, it has to be paid, and if we don't pay it, somebody has to pay it. So God pays it himself. He's like the judge who is just, so his son is in front of him and he's just had a traffic accident and he's been driving recklessly and the fine is $1,000, and the son doesn't have any money to pay, and what does the judge do? He fines the son $1,000, and then he pays it out of his own pocket. That's what God does. I'm not claiming I fully understand that or that I can fully explain or defend that, but that's certainly central to our data, to Christian theology. What we would like God to do, of course, is to emphasize mercy and not justice, because that would make him just like us. What our ancestors would probably like God to do would be emphasize justice and not mercy, because that would make him like them. Fortunately, we did not create God in our own image. He created us in his. But we've been returning the compliment to him ever since. We probably want mercy without justice for ourselves, but maybe we want justice without mercy for our enemies. But that won't work, because you're supposed to do unto others as you want others to do unto you. So if you want justice for your enemies, that's fair only if you want justice for yourself. Do you want justice? I was once in a debate with 3 other people. It was sponsored by a fundamentalist Protestant organization, Campus Crusade for Christ. I was the only Christian on the stage. It was an atheist, a rabbi, and an imam, a Muslim. And I don't know what we were talking about, comparative religions, I think. But I said to Abu, the Muslim, we were talking about Jesus, and I said, one of us is dead wrong about him. Either we're worshiping a man as if he's God, and you're wrong, or else you're failing to worship God when he came right down here and put his face in your face, and then you're wrong. And one of us will have to apologize to God in heaven if we both get there, and we'll laugh about our mistakes. And one of the Protestants in the audience afterwards, asking me a question, said, Professor Kreeft, I thought you were a Christian. I said, I am. He said, well, don't you believe that we're saved only by Christ? And I said, yes. And only by grace? Yes. Well, you said to Abu, I hope I see you in heaven. He doesn't believe in Jesus Christ. You think he's going to get to heaven? I said, well, I don't know. His head doesn't, but maybe his heart does. I don't know. God is to judge, not me. And he pressed the point. I like people who press the point. That make me sweat and ask hard questions. That's good. That's great. He said, but we believe that however much we know about Christ, we can only get to heaven if we depend on God's grace and God's mercy, not by being good enough, not by obeying the law. Nobody gets to heaven that way. I said, that's right, I believe that. He said, well, we Christians believe that, but Muslims don't believe that. I said, really? Well, instead of talking about them, let's talk to one. Let's talk on stage here. Abu, I said. I never met him before, but I thought he knew his religion well enough to answer this question right. Abu, you believe in God and the Last Judgment, don't you? Yes. And you believe that when you die, you will appear before God and he will judge you, right? Yes. And you will go either to paradise or to hell, right? Right. Now, what is your hope of heaven? Is it God's justice? Do you think you can merit heaven? Do you hope that you're righteous enough to go to heaven? His eyes got big. He said, no intelligent Muslim in the world would make that ridiculous mistake. Our only hope is in his mercy. I said, good, you're wise. And the critic sat down. We have no hope in justice, only in mercy. Even in human relationships, how are the Palestinians and the Israelis going to stop killing each other? Not by demanding justice. They've both committed crimes. They're both guilty of injustices. Forgiveness is their only hope. Mercy is their only hope. And certainly, in relation to God, mercy is our only hope. So, justice without mercy is not enough. On the other hand, mercy without justice isn't either. Because mercy without justice doesn't make sense. You have to first learn justice in order to have mercy. Here, let me read you what Thomas Aquinas says in the Summa Theologica about justice and mercy. Book 1, question 21, article 3. Can mercy be attributed to God? Quote, It seems that mercy cannot be attributed to God, for mercy is a relaxation of justice, but God cannot remit what appertains to his justice, for, as Scripture says, if we are faithless, still he continues faithful. He cannot deny himself. Well, the premise is right. God cannot change, cannot deny himself. He is just. He can't stop being just. Reply. God acts mercifully by not going against his justice, but by doing something more than justice. Thus, a man who pays another 200 pieces of money, though he owes him only 100 pieces, does the other man no injustice, but acts mercifully. The case is the same with one who pardons an offense committed against him, for in remitting the offense he may be said to bestow a gift. And then in the next article, Article 4, he asks whether in every work of God there are both mercy and justice. And he says justice must exist in all of God's works. Now, the work of divine justice always presupposes the work of mercy and is founded upon it. For nothing can be due in justice to a creature except for something pre-existing in that creature. And since we cannot go on to infinity, backwards, we must come to something that depends only on the goodness of the divine will, for the very existence of creatures comes from that will. We can't deserve to exist before we exist. So, since our existence is the foundation of everything else, that depends totally on God's mercy, and therefore our justice depends on our mercy. Now, mercy presupposes justice to define itself. It means going beyond justice. But justice presupposes mercy in being. Mercy comes first because we were created. Our very being is a gift. Our very existence is a gift. And we can't deserve something before we exist. So we didn't deserve to exist. That's why St. Teresa says, everything is a grace. Everything. The ultimate foundation for that is the very nature of God. God is a Trinity, which is pure gift. The Father gives himself to the Son eternally. The Son gives himself to the Father eternally. The Holy Spirit is that eternal gift between the Father and the Son. That's what love is, the gift of the self. Thus, God is love. And when that love meets sin, it takes the form of forgiveness and mercy. And for us to live in reality, for us to be real, is to be like God. That's why mercy is not just a good thing to do, but it's what makes you more real. We often think that metaphysics and ethics are very different. Metaphysics is a very abstract division of philosophy that deals with what is real. And ethics is a very practical division of philosophy, which it deals with the question, what kind of a person should I be and what should I do? But they're ultimately one. Because the supreme goodness, the supreme ethical goodness, namely love, goes all the way up into ultimate reality. It's not just something good for us to do. It's what reality is. God is love. He's not just a lover. He's love. Well, that's the main thing God has revealed. He didn't have to reveal his existence. Everybody but a fool knows that. And the Bible doesn't give you any arguments for the existence of God. But what the Bible does is reveal the character of God. And it does that historically and gradually, starting in a very simple and primitive way, appropriate for children, and then it becomes more mature, which is why mercy becomes more prominent as you go along in divine revelation. But although it's always founded on justice. So what has God revealed about himself? Well, that he's God, that there's only one of him, that he's totally good, that he's the standard for all goodness, that goodness includes justice as an absolute, and that it also includes love as an absolute. And love requires mercy, and mercy requires forgiveness. So you've got these two non-negotiable absolutes in the very nature of God. So maybe how we solve our conflicts between justice and mercy can be understood only if we understand how God does it. Well, how does God do it? Well, before we can intelligently approach that problem, we have to be sure we understand what divine mercy and divine love are. Divine love is not a feeling. Human love includes feeling. Feeling is a natural dimension of human beings. And if I love you in a cold and rational and willful way, but have no feelings for you, that's not complete love. But feelings are passive. Feelings are not under your control. They move you. God can't be like that. He can't be pushed around. So the reason God doesn't have feelings, the reason that God doesn't fall in love as we do, is the same reason the ocean can't get wet or fire can't get hot. He already is infinite love. He's not passive to more love. He can't fall in love. He already is totally in love. So the essence of love, as it's found in God, is not a feeling. The essence of love is a will. He wills the good of the other, of everybody. That's the essence of, it's a very simple definition of love, to will the good of the other. Now, when love meets evil, it requires sacrifice. And even when human love meets evil, it requires sacrifice and the death to egotism and suffering. So, part of ethics for everybody, for every religion in the world, and for every reasonable person in the world, is overcome your egotism, overcome your natural selfishness. My definition of original sin is very simple. It's original selfishness. We pop out of the womb programmed to, I want what I want when I want it. I'm God, I want to enslave everybody else and make them serve me. So we're born insane. So we have to get saved. We've got a very serious problem. And every religion in the world in a different way sees that. So love somehow overcomes egotism and just gives itself away. And that's a great mystery. How can the self sacrifice itself? Isn't that self-contradictory? The gift can't be given if the giver is dead. And yet, when the self gives itself away in genuine love, that death of self is the only way the self can live. That's a great paradox. And once again, all the religions of the world see that incredible paradox in some way or another. It is not explainable in scientific terms because science deals with this universe, and this universe is made of matter, and in the world of matter there's competition. Two bodies cannot occupy the same space at the same time. And two people can't share a slice of pizza equally. They have to cut it in half, and each one has only half. That's the law of matter. That's not the law of spirit. The more I love you, the more love I have left. The more money I give you, the less money I have left. The more wisdom I give you, the more wisdom I have left. I've learned a lot more on this side of the desk than I ever did as a student on the other side. So spiritual things grow when they're given away. Material things diminish when they're given away. And we live not only in a material universe, but in a spiritual universe. All right, that's love. Now, let's look in light of that at the relation between love and justice. Justice is truth as it's applied to morality. Why must you be just? Because that's the way the moral universe is. It's true that you ought to do to others what you want them to do to you. It's true that you ought to be fair. It's true that all human beings are essentially equal and have equal rights. It's good because it's true. Truth and justice are almost the same thing. Justice is truth as it applies to morality. And mercy is love. Mercy is to love what justice is to truth. And if love and truth are absolute, if they're the nature of God, then justice and mercy are both absolute too. So God can't be unjust, and he can't be unmerciful. Both are eternal. Both are essential. Both are non-negotiable. So you got to reconcile them somehow. But in time, it takes time to reconcile them, and you have to learn one thing at a time before you put them together. So when you teach little kids about morality, although you have everything in mind at the same time, you're going to teach them what it is to be a complete human being, they have to learn one lesson at a time, and they learn justice first. I remember when our son was about 3 or 4, my wife and I had not a difference of opinion, but an uncertainty about whether we should give him toy guns. I'm not a pacifist, but I'm not a militarist either, and a gun is essentially an instrument of killing, and we wondered whether it's wrong to give boys toy guns, and we decided, well, let's not. Not going to do him any harm. And we watched how he played with the other kids in the neighborhood, and most of them had toy guns, and what our son did was he took a tree branch that looked like a gun and made it a gun. So I said, okay, there's something inherent in human nature, we're not going to squash that. But then I listened to how the kids were playing with their guns. And they were just 3 or 4 years old, so they were very young, but I was very impressed by how moral they were. They played cops and robbers, and the cops were the good guys, and the robbers were the bad guys. The cops always killed the robbers. The robbers never killed the cops. And the kids who played cops in game 1 had to play robbers in game 2. I'm a cop today. No, I want to be the cop today. No, I want to be the cop today. Well, I'll let you be the cop today if you let me be the cop tomorrow. Oh, okay. They understand justice very well. Mercy comes later. If you read the Old Testament, you find it very primitive, very cruel, very strong on justice, kind of weak on mercy. Why? Because it's primitive. It's like a little kid. Yeah, there's mercy there, but you learn it later, after you learn justice. Once you learn there is something to forgive, then you can forgive. It takes time. We don't have instant wisdom or instant sanctity. So I think God's a very good psychologist. He teaches his chosen people simple things first. There's only one of me. Just imagine God had tried to reveal the Trinity to Moses. He would have thought, oh, that's polytheism. Wrong. One thing at a time. Everything in its time. Well, God can't be unjust because he's true. He can't be unmerciful because he's love. And love is the gift of self, giving oneself away. And that's his nature, the Trinity of self-giving love. It's crazy. I mean, God loves us. The best question any student ever asked me was after a course in which we had just finished what I think is the greatest Christian novel ever written, The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky. And there's a profound saint and mystic, Father Zosima, who's at the center of it. And the student was an agnostic. And she came up to me afterwards and said, you don't believe this stuff? I said, what stuff? Dostoevsky stuff. What do you mean Dostoevsky stuff? Christianity. I said, yeah, I do. Well, this love stuff, God is total love. Like Father Zosima says, do you believe that? I said, yep. Do you believe God loves us? Uh-huh. Why? I said, why do I believe it? Because of Jesus. No, not why do you believe it. Why does God love us? What's in it for him? Nothing. What did he get out of it? A crucifixion. So why does he love us? That stumped me. That totally stumped me. So, being very foolish, I said something that I thought was funny. Come back in a year, maybe I'll have the answer then. I don't have it now. 1 year after that day, to the day, she came to me and said, remember me? You said come back in a year. Do you have the answer now? I said, no, I'll have it in heaven. See you there. That's crazy. But he's our daddy. And he loves his very severely retarded and handicapped children, us. Thank God. Okay, so he's not going to compromise justice and he's not going to compromise mercy. How is he going to reconcile them? Well, there's a psalm about that, Psalm 85. And verses 10 and 11 say, mercy and truth are met together Righteousness and peace have kissed each other. Truth shall spring out of the earth, and righteousness shall look down from heaven. Now that's a messianic prophecy. Even though it doesn't seem to talk about a single person who's the Messiah, he, Jesus, is going to reconcile justice and mercy on the cross. We get the mercy, he gets the justice. Mercy and truth have met together. Mercy is love, and justice is truth. So in reconciling love and truth, you're reconciling mercy and justice. They're met together. Righteousness and peace, another way of saying the same thing. Righteousness is justice, peace is what love and mercy cause. They have kissed each other. How? Because truth shall spring out of the earth. You don't expect that. Truth comes from down here. It's eternal. And righteousness shall look down from heaven. Righteousness is another word for justice. So justice is going to come both from the earth and from the heaven. The reconciliation of heaven and earth are going to reconcile justice and mercy. How is that done? Jesus. He's human and divine. He came up from his mother's womb and grew up like all of us, like a plant. But he came down from heaven. So in the one who has a double origin, a double parentage, he didn't have a human father, he had a divine father. He didn't have a divine mother, he had a human mother. He's the one who's going to reconcile justice and mercy. The next verse says, "The Lord shall give that which is good, and our land shall yield her increase. Righteousness shall go before him, and shall set us in the way of his steps." So this reconciliation is going to come from the Lord. He will give it. But also from humanity, from the land, from the earth. And that's going to be in his steps, and we follow in his steps, we can do it too. So that's a beautiful messianic prophecy. Only in the mystery of Christ does St. John Paul II say, can we understand ourselves? Christianity says two things about Jesus, equally important. Jesus is fully God and Jesus is fully man. Without Jesus, we don't know who God is. Without Jesus, we don't know who we are. That's what the human image of God looks like, and that's what the divine nature looks like. In this reconciliation, which is very mysterious, and I don't claim to explain it or understand all of it, I just thank God for it. It's a gift. It's grace. In that reconciliation, mercy has to be ultimate, because love is ultimate. And mercy is what love does when it finds evil, any kind of evil. When it finds physical evil or suffering, it expresses itself in compassion. And when it finds moral evil or sin, it expresses itself in forgiveness. Well, why is there hell then? Well, because forgiveness is a free gift, of course. But wait a minute, a free gift has to be freely given and freely received. So if I give you a gift and you don't trust me, and you don't receive it, you don't get it. I slap you on the head, that's not a gift. I sneak a kiss at you, that's not a gift. But if you ask for it, it's a gift. All right, salvation is a gift. And God freely gives it, no matter who you are, no matter how bad a sinner you are. You are so proud that you think maybe you can commit a sin so big that God can't forgive it. You idiot. You can't do that. He's infinite. Sin's finite. No matter how bad a sinner you are, you can't possibly commit a sin that God won't forgive. But you can refuse to accept the forgiveness. And what does he do then? He keeps on loving you. Well, then why is there hell? Because you hate his love. Some of the mystics say heaven and hell are really the same place. Those in heaven love it. Those in hell hate it. Remember you were a little kid. You did something really bad and really wrong. You felt bad about yourself and you hated yourself. And your parents forgave you. And they love you. And they put their arms around you. You wanted them to fight with you. You wanted to be self-righteous. And they wouldn't fight. That was torture. Come on, fight with me. I want to fight with you back. No, I won't. I love you. Well, I think that's an image of hell. I don't personally believe that we have to believe, or we even should believe, in a God who wants to put anybody in hell. That would be a moral monster. I don't believe God invented hell. I believe we invented it ourselves. Well, why does God tolerate it then? Because he respects your free will. And that's part of love. Scratch the doctrine of free will and you find the possibility of hell underneath. We don't know how many people go there. It's certainly not necessary to believe that the majority of people go there. When the disciples asked Jesus, Lord, are many going to be saved? He didn't say yes, he didn't say no. He said, strive to enter in. It's a hard way, it's a narrow way, it takes effort. But I'm not going to give you comparative population statistics of heaven and hell. Because if I said 90% are going to be saved, you'll relax. And if I said 10% are going to be saved, you'll sweat. And I don't want you to do either. I want you to love each other. In other words, mind your own business. Sometimes it's better not to know. Maybe the most important thing we have to know about this is that even if you can't understand how mercy and justice fit together and can be reconciled, and even if you can't understand how God reconciles them, you understand that they're both absolute. They're both divine demands. And that ethics goes all the way up into God. Ethics is not just a human thing. Ethics and theology are ultimately identical because God is love. So for us to love and for us to be merciful and for us to be forgiving is literally for us to be channels of God's grace. Because when you do that, when you don't just give human compassion and human justice and human mercy, but when you give supernatural love, agape, that's letting God work. You're literally being a channel of his peace. That beautiful prayer of St. Francis. And that's the meaning of life. So go out and do it. All right, I'm giving myself the hook after 45 minutes, and now you've got 45 minutes for questions. Now comes the interesting part. And if there are no questions, I will insult you. Because as old Aristotle once said to some students who didn't have any questions after one of his lectures, he said, animals ask no questions because they know too little. The gods ask no questions because they know too much. Only human beings ask questions. If you have no questions, shall I congratulate you on having become gods, or shall I insult you upon having become beasts? After that, there were questions. So, assuming there were some human beings in the audience, what are the questions? Do we have a mic to pass around, or the acoustics are good enough? You can just shout out your question, I think. Good.
Hi, I have kind of a two-part question. One of them deals more with justice, and the other deals more with mercy.
Good.
And maybe because I'm a student, when you started using debt language, that sort of hit me hard. You talked really immediately about how debt language is used for like existence. So then, if we start talking about how God creates, and then all of a sudden it's a debt that you can never repay, then how can we talk about? The problem isn't really like how can God be both merciful and just, but how can we even talk about us being just towards God since we can never repay anything that God gives us?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, let's do that one first, because I'll forget it. Your second question is going to be so interesting, it'll make me forget the first one. Debt language is an analogy, and all analogies ultimately fail. It's an economic analogy, and economics is a human thing. When you get to heaven, if you're an economist, you're going to be out of a job. There's no money there. Okay. But it's a useful analogy because it means you owe somebody something. Now, what do we owe to God? We owe to God our hearts, our infinite love, our infinite respect, and we don't give it to him. So we're his debtors. So one of the formulations of the Lord's Prayer is, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Notice that Jesus, he was very, very clever. In the Lord's Prayer, the only prayer he ever gave us, the most important prayer in the world, the prayer that all Christians are commanded to pray, his answer to the question, teach us to pray, one of the 6 petitions of the Lord's Prayer is, God, please send me to hell if I do not forgive my neighbor all of his sins against me. Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. If we forgive totally from the heart, then God will forgive us. If we hold it back, he won't forgive us. Why? Because he's stingy? No, he can't. Why? If you have an open hand to give forgiveness to other people, you also have an open hand to accept it from God. If you have the closed fist and demand justice for other people, then you have the closed fist and you won't accept mercy, but you'll demand justice for God. So anybody who says to God, I don't want your mercy, I want your justice, is going to hell. Not because they're so wicked, but because they refused the only way to heaven, which is pure mercy and pure love. So that's my take on the debt language.
And then the second part was, in talking about mercy, just to go into the details of some of the data then, would be a lot of the time memory, the word memory and God remembering his mercy is used. So I was wondering if you could talk about mercy and what does it have to do with, what does memory mean when God remembers his mercy, and how do we understand that as an event?
Another good question. That's another analogy. Analogies aren't literally true, but they are true in a non-literal way. God doesn't literally have memory because memory is a time consciousness, and God's not in time. And since God doesn't literally have memory, God doesn't literally forget anything, ever. He knows everything all at once, forever. Past, present, and future are all together in him. And I think we understand that only at the moment when we die, when we say, my whole life passed before me in one moment and it was all in perfect order. Well, that's a foretaste of heaven and divine consciousness. Okay, so God doesn't literally have memory. So when we pray, God, remember your covenant, that's an analogy. We know that he will remember his covenant. So we're affirming that which is. We're not pleading with God to try to change his mind and change him from forgetting to remembering. We're saying, hurrah, you remember, and I accept that too. We're changing our own mind. That's why we pray. Not to change God's mind or will, but to change ours. It's a kind of projection. We're projecting our own absent-mindedness onto God.
So then, I guess just in your answer, does that flip around the priority? Because justice is the one that seems automatic, whereas mercy is the one that seems to come after a pause.
Well, that's true. That doesn't mean that justice is more important than mercy, but it does mean that justice is necessary and automatic, and mercy is a choice. You have no choice about justice. You have choice about mercy. So, since love is a free choice, mercy is connected with love. And since truth is not a free choice, justice is connected with truth. You have no choice about whether 2 and 2 are 4. You do have a choice about whether I'm going to love you or not. But since the human is more important than the mathematical, and since the heart is more important than the head, and by the heart I just don't mean feeling, and since love is more important than anything, therefore this free choice to love is the single most important thing in the world. Even more important than the eternal absolute truth or justice, which is indeed eternal and absolute and unchanging. But you can't do anything about that. You can do something about mercy. Yeah.
A question. I don't know, it just came to me. Could Jesus' sacrifice on the cross be a defense of freedom of choice?
Yeah.
Our human condition?
Yep. First of all, it existed only because human beings made the free choice to murder him. Secondly, it existed only because he made the free choice to step into our trap, to save us. And thirdly, it assumes free will on our part to say yes or no to that injustice. So there's free will throughout the story. Every really good story told by any human storyteller is not about robots, but about human beings who have free will and could choose differently. That's what makes the story dramatic. It's unpredictable. And God tells the story of human life, and from his eternal point of view, he knows everything, and there is predestination. That doesn't take away our free will. Does Shakespeare's predestination of Hamlet and control of everything in Hamlet mean that Hamlet's a robot? No, just the opposite. It establishes Hamlet as a human being with agonizing choices. We may not be able to logically reconcile predestination and free will. If we think in quasi-material terms, am I a puppet? Does God pull my strings and then I don't have free will? Or do I pull my own strings and then God doesn't? We can't solve that problem. But we know from our experience that every story, every real human story and every fictional story has both predestination in it and free will. Otherwise, it's not a good story. So somehow we know that they're both true. Yeah.
You mentioned that you're a parent, and I was wondering, since you said children are so good at doing justice, especially in their play and their interactions, what is a practical way to teach children mercy?
Well, they understand the golden rule pretty early, and that's a rule basically of justice. But they want other people to be merciful to them. When they mess up, they want other people to say, yes, you messed up, but that's okay, I forgive you, I'll give you a second chance. And therefore they have to do that to other people. So it's easy to go from justice to mercy. You want justice? You want mercy? Well, justice demands then that you give mercy. And kids usually have a pretty good imagination. It's adults who sometimes stifle their imagination. You have to have an imagination to put yourself into somebody else's shoes and understand the golden rule. How would you like it if they did that to you? Oh, yeah, okay. Some people find it very difficult to imaginatively project themselves into somebody else's position. So I think one of the great aids to moral education is novels, literature, stories about human beings interacting. They expand our human imagination. And kids respond to stories, of course, very well. I don't know why the Lives of the Saints has dropped out of Catholic education. That's one of the most powerful incentives to moral education that I know. Look at these moral heroes. And if you really understand a saint, you'll see how happy they are. You got to get the right stories about the saints. You can't get misunderstood stories, puritanical, repressive, legalistic kind of stuff. That won't do any good. But if you really understand a saint, when I have a really cynical, negative, atheist student who thinks that Christianity is unhappy and repressive and being a saint is the worst thing in the world, I challenge him. I say, all right, be a scientist. Look at the data. What do you mean the data? Go 2 miles from Boston College south to Roxbury, which is the worst slum in Boston. And go to this address, and there you'll find Mother Teresa's Missionaries of Charity. And these nuns, like Mother Teresa, are very poor. They have 2 changes of clothing. They have a bucket and a rag and little else, and they get up 4:30 in the morning and they pray for a couple of hours before the Eucharist, and then they go out and pick up the pieces of broken lives as best they can. They go into the worst and poorest and most desperate situations, and they do whatever good they can. And you will never, ever in this world find any human beings happier than they are, or genuinely happy. That's what a saint is. Try it. You'll like it. The poor devil, he's got to keep fooling us all the time because the data is all around us. Good people are happy, bad people are miserable. If you're good, you'll be happy. If you're bad, you'll be sad. That's true. It's so obvious. And if you don't believe it, try it in your own life. Act the devil's philosopher for a day. Be a selfish pig. And at the end of the day, say, am I happy? And then try Jesus' philosophy for another day. Love people with all your heart. And at the end of the day, are you happy? That's data. You can't ignore data. More questions? Yeah, up here.
I've heard Catholic philosophers and theologians talk about God's mercy as something so great that he could have just snapped his fingers and all sins would have been forgiven. And that has always conflicted with my understanding, which was essentially what you have said this evening. What would you say to them in response to that?
Forgiveness is not a subjective attitude. It's not that God can snap his fingers and change his mind and change his feelings and say, I don't hate you anymore, I love you. Forgiveness is a relationship between persons. So the relationship between us and God is either a positive one or a negative one. And forgiveness is God's doing his part to turn that negative relationship called sin into that positive relationship. And we have to do our part. We have to receive the gift, but he gives it. So it's not as if he's a magician and by snapping his fingers can do anything that even violates the laws of justice. He can't. He can't change reality. He can't change truth. He is reality. He is truth. The reason both truth and justice and love and mercy are absolute is that that's the nature of God. He can't change his nature. He can't say, I don't care about right and wrong anymore. He can't do that because he does care. It's not a choice on his part. It's a necessity. So it's not true that he could snap his fingers and say, you're all forgiven. He has to either require us to pay the debt or he pays the debt himself. And even when he pays the debt himself, we have to assimilate that. We have to believe that, we have to accept that, we have to take that up into our lives, and we have to share in the sufferings of Christ in order to be morally educated. Everybody knows that you can't be educated without effort. We're not blank tablets like blackboards, and God just writes a piece of chalk on us, and without our free will, we transform instantly into saints. Can't do that. It's got to be our choice. We've got to learn by experience, and the experience always involves suffering. Any artist knows that. Any scientist knows that. You've got to have spiritual suffering, mental suffering. You've got to overcome our natural egotism. So it's not a snap fingers thing. That's a very bad concept of God.
Do you think that mercy is embedded in our culture after Christ came, or is it something that we can change and become more focused on justice? And if so, should we?
Christian culture has always specialized in mercy, and the world was always astonished at that. In the late Roman Empire, in the early church, all the pagans were amazed at the fact that Christian love was so different than pagan love. Pagans exalted love too, and even charity, and even philanthropy, but Christians were risking their lives to minister to people dying of the plague. And the martyrs went singing with hymns on their lips into the mouths of lions rather than betray Christ. And they said, wow, that's something new. We never saw that before. So that's a very specifically Christian thing. Jesus predicted it. He said, they will know that you are my disciples by the agape you have for each other. Now, in Jesus' time, the word agape had almost no meaning at all, because it's a Greek word, and the Greeks always liked specific words. They didn't like generic words. They were very big on clarity and science, and there's a whole bunch of specific words in Greek for love. Eros means desire, mainly sexual desire, but not only that. And storge means spontaneous affection. And philia means friendship, human friendship. But agape was just a generic word, some kind of love or other. So they hardly used it. So Jesus picked up that word, or whoever wrote the New Testament in Greek picked up the word from Aramaic. I don't know what it is in the language he used, Aramaic. And that's the new word for this new, specifically Christian kind of love. So if Jesus had meant love in general, it would have been meaningless. By this, they will know that you are my disciples. By this, you will stand out. By this, you will be recognized as special people and very different, because you have the same kind of love everybody else has. That makes no sense. It's a different kind of love. It's a radically different kind of love. And throughout Christian history, it's the saints who startled the world with this kind of love. And as a country regresses from Christianity, that love also regresses. And as our culture is abandoning Christian love, it's regressing. The ideal is no longer the saint. The ideal is now the autonomous yuppie. So we've got a great opportunity. We're in a new pagan Roman Empire. And we've got to show the world. In the back.
Sir, your talk tonight is mostly on individual justice and mercy. What about institutions? Because too often we see institutions, individuals in the institutions will come to justice. Either the institution as a whole will not acknowledge injustice, or other individuals within the institution will try to cover it up. Should we change how we approach this institution using mercy and justice any differently than we would with money?
That's a good question, and it's a tough one. With only one exception, all institutions are expressions of and manifestations of and inventions of human beings. We make our institutions before they make us. The only institution not like that's the church. That's made by Christ. All right. So I don't think there's a double standard then between the justice of institutions and the justice of individuals. I think Plato showed that in the Republic. There's a lot of bad politics in the Republic, but his psychology is on target. What is justice for a state is justice for an individual. What is virtue for a state is virtue for an individual, because states are made by individuals, and they're made for individuals. On the other hand, there has to be something different about institutional justice than individual justice. You expect individuals to go beyond the call of duty. But an institution, unless it's a charitable institution, has to go by duty. Duty is a kind of minimal morality. So institutions have to rely more on justice and less on mercy than individuals do. Take pacifism, for instance. Christians are encouraged to practice individual pacifism. They have the right of self-defense, but they're encouraged to give up that right out of charity. But I don't think that applies to institutions. I think a pacifist president is a cop-out, because a president is responsible for other people. And he's like the father of a very big family. And even Gandhi said, I'm the father of a lot of children, and I'm a pacifist, and I don't believe in war, and I don't believe in aggression, but if somebody started killing my children, and the only way to save the remaining children would be to use lethal force against him, I would do so, not to kill him, but to protect my children. Well, if even Gandhi says that, I don't think pacifism is a very responsible attitude for a country. We've got to protect your people. But it's an honorable option for individuals. So there is something of a double standard there. So that's a complicated question. I seem to have contradicted myself. I said on the one hand, there can't be fundamentally a double standard, and on the other hand, well, there's sort of a double standard. Individuals are certainly held to higher standards than institutions. That's because individuals make up institutions, and institutions are responsible for their clients. So if your bank became very charitable and gave away all its money, that's not fair to you. But if you want to be very charitable and give away all your money, fine. As long as you're not in the position of a bank or the father of a family who needs the money. I mean, you're old and your kids are all okay and you've got $1 million extra, fine, give it away. You're not going to hurt anybody, but institutions often would. So it's not really a double standard. The principles are still the same, but how you apply them institutionally isn't the same as how you apply them individually. Yes?
Why did Jesus have to die? Why couldn't God have shown mercy on him? I know you mentioned earlier that blood was the source of atonement for sin. Why did he have to die?
Yeah, blood, of course, means life. The ancients thought that life was in the blood, so without the shedding of blood, there is no remission, means literally, without death, there is no remission of sin. It's certainly not because God gets mad and takes vengeance. There's no hate in God. The wrath of God is a human metaphor that expresses something very true and very important. God has wrath not against sinners, he has wrath against sin. He commands us to love sinners more, but sins less. If a doctor says, I have compassion on all your cells, including the cancer cells that are killing you, he's not really a loving doctor. And if sin is like cancer cells, God does indeed have wrath against sin. Has to. But not against sinners. So why does Jesus have to die? Because God can't just snap his fingers and say it doesn't matter. It does matter. That's not an adequate answer, but it's true. And I don't think anybody has ever given a totally adequate answer to how salvation works. What is the spiritual mechanism? I don't even know how electricity works, for goodness sakes. How am I going to know how salvation works? But he's told us that he has to do it. And of course, God didn't kill Jesus. We did. In Mel Gibson's marvelous movie, there is this scene where Jesus is being nailed to the cross and the Roman soldier is botching the job. And you hear a voice. You don't see a face, but you hear a voice saying, here, let me show you how to do this. And then you see a hand coming in from off screen. It takes the hammer and the nail out of the centurion's hand, and it puts the nail in Christ's hand, and it hammers him. That's Mel Gibson. So it's not that God kills his son, we killed him. The sign on the cross was written in Hebrew and Greek and Latin. Why all three languages? Because we all killed Christ. If we hadn't sinned, he wouldn't have had to die. We may not be able to understand why that works or how that works, but that's true. That's pretty clear. So that's a way of saying it wasn't just the Jews, it wasn't just the Romans, it was everybody. It was you. You know, the old Negro spiritual, were you there when they crucified my Lord? Yeah, I was there. I was one of those soldiers. And he died for me. Almost his last words are, Father, forgive them. Who? The ones that are killing me. As I said, I don't understand it. And I don't understand either why God loves us so crazy much. He seems nuts. Thank God he's nuts. If he was reasonable and rational, he'd say, well, some things are beyond forgiveness. And you don't deserve to be forgiven. True. And therefore I'll forgive you. What? That's the good news. The gospel's good news. It's a shock. If you're not shocked by the gospel, if you're not surprised by the gospel, you don't understand it. The gospel is not, there's a God and he's good and you're partly good and evil and there's a moral law and you ought to obey it. Everybody knows that. That's not news. God loves you that crazy much. That's news. That's the fire that changed the world. This is one of the reasons I love Pope Francis. He's like a new St. Francis. He's on fire with that good news. A specialist in mercy.
How can virtue ethicists in the academy, how can they combat sort of the rising tide of utilitarianism, consequentialism, relativism, etc.? Thank you also for coming out here. I should say that as well.
Well, in the academy, which specializes in reason, the weapon you use is reason. And utilitarianism is utterly irrational. It's not an ethic at all. It's not an inferior ethic. It's a denial of the whole ethical order. It's pure pragmatism. It's the end justifies the means. If all of you were cannibals, and I was the only non-cannibal, utilitarian ethics would say, well, since the greatest pleasure, happiness equals pleasure for a utilitarian, for the greatest number of people in this room would be if all of you killed me and ate part of my body parts. Therefore, that's the ethical thing to do. That's nonsense. We all know that's nonsense. So you don't have to appeal to some esoteric argument. You appeal to natural human ethical instincts. And utilitarians can be very clever in defending their outrageous position, but the position is outrageous.
Thank you.
Caiaphas was a utilitarian. He said, yeah, Jesus is innocent, he's a good man, and maybe even he's the Messiah. But, look here, if we don't crucify him, what's going to happen? There's going to be a riot, and the Romans will come, and they'll kill a lot of people. All right, would you rather have 1,000 people dead or one? So let's kill the one to satisfy the crowd. There's something in us that likes utilitarianism. There's some kind of false rationality that says, yeah, that makes sense. A homicidal maniac comes into this room and gives me a knife and stands on stage with a machine gun and says, Professor Kreeft, I lust for blood, and I want you to pick 3 people out from the front row and cut their heads off. And then I'll be satisfied and I'll go away. If you don't do that, I'll kill everybody in this room. And just to prove it, I'll kill everybody in the second row. And he does, you're all dead. Now we know he means business. So what do? Do I take the knife and cut 3 innocent heads off so that I save the rest of you? No, I don't. That's utilitarianism. The end does not justify the means. You have to do the right thing for the right motive in the right way, and the end has to be right and the means have to be right. So you don't use the wrong means to attain the right end. You don't save some people's lives by killing other people's lives. If by killing a single human being and harvesting his organs you can save 10, do you do it? No. No. Some things are sacred. That might be how you play chess. You sacrifice a couple of pieces in order to get a checkmate. But life is not chess. And I think the human heart, even of a convinced utilitarian, is still a human heart, and it knows the natural moral law. And even though it may not admit it, it's not certain. Because the human heart was not designed at Harvard, it was designed in heaven. In fact, every little baby comes out of the womb with a little label, made in heaven, on its tush. Yeah.
I just want to start out by saying that my sophomore year of high school, I read your book, Fundamentals of the Faith. It was a good book. And I was going to ask, with regards to stuff like natural moral law, if there's such thing as innate moral virtues, then how can we explain the existence of there being so many different moral standards throughout the world and all many different people? And in many cultures, stuff like violence has been deified. Like in ancient cultures, it was a holy thing to go to war. And how can we explain violence?
Because only the principles are clear. How to apply them to very different situations is not clear. And there's a lot of real relativism in ethics. What makes a just war? When should you use violence? Is torture ever right? Is capital punishment the best for us? There are answers to those questions, but they're not easy. God didn't answer all our questions for us. He gave us 10 absolutes, and now we have to apply them to relative situations. So we shouldn't be shocked or scandalized by the fact that sincere people who are trying to do the right thing differ about what's a virtue and what's a vice, especially in emphasis. How important is justice? How important is mercy? There's an example.
It seems like Pope John Paul II emphasized justice, and now Pope Francis emphasizes mercy more. Is that a sign of the times that they were in, or am I just misreading it wrong?
I think you're misreading it. There's two ways to understand the popes. Through those who love them and through those who hate them. In other words, you can understand the popes through their own words, or you can understand the popes through the words of the unbelieving anti-Catholic media. Take your choice. What's just? They explain themselves. Francis is not compromising justice, and he's not changing doctrine, he's just emphasizing mercy. And John Paul was a great philosopher and a great intellectual, so he was very big on truth and big on justice and big on the natural moral law, and so is Francis. They don't disagree with each other. And pre-Vatican II Church and post-Vatican II Church don't disagree with each other. All the popes say that. It's all of a piece.
At the end of the Brothers Karamazov, the defender of Dmitri starts talking about how the situation of his father, Theodore, made him not a father, fundamentally, even though he was the father of Luigi. The prosecutor did not think so. Who do you believe was defending God's command?
Dostoevsky is clearly presenting that scene as a satire against the modern ethic that lets you off the hook because of your environment. He had such a bad father, he wasn't really the father. So even though he probably killed him, don't judge him guilty. His circumstances made him bad. Nobody's circumstances make them bad. Circumstances make it easier to be bad, or better to be bad, so they count. But the fact that this horrible man, Fyodor, was in fact Dmitri's father, and the fact that we are all commanded to honor our father and mother, not just good ones, but bad ones too, means that there's an absolute. And Dmitri's defender didn't believe in absolutes. So really the prosecutor was closer not only to the truth, but to Dmitri than the defender. The defender wasn't defending Dmitri at all. That's the paradox in Dostoevsky.
It's funny because it was a situation that made Dmitri look guilty in the first place.
And he wasn't. The fact that he didn't commit the murder, and yet, well, I won't go into the but read the book. It's great. 3 or 4 times, in fact. You get something more out of it every time. And don't be put off by all the Russian names. Nobody remembers them all. Yes, in the back.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to pass it up here. So to harken back to your earlier analogy where you said that if we close our hands to others and demanded justice from them, then we cannot accept justice from God. And so relating that to Pope Paul VI's instructed, if you want peace, work for justice. How do we simultaneously work for justice in the world, in our own lives, while also being open to accepting that mercy and compassion from God?
Well, when you're fighting a battle, whether physical or spiritual, there are various lines of offense and defense. And justice is a kind of second line of defense. Mercy goes beyond justice. Mercy is out in the offense, in the front lines. So think of justice as a series of bunkers. If you can't do mercy, at least do justice. If you can't do love, at least do your duty. Both are good, but one is sort of like offense and the other is sort of like defense. I don't know if that works, but I think it does on a sports analogy. But I really haven't answered your question very well. You want to push it any further?
Well, I guess just, if we have to work for justice in the world to achieve peace, then inherently we must deny certain people mercy and compassion. They must get their just desserts. And
No, that doesn't follow. No, there can be forgiveness. Even banks forgive debts. The trick is to get both sides to forgive. That's tricky, especially if they hate each other. Sometimes it works. It worked fairly well in Northern Ireland. The troubles are pretty much over there. To get peace, you need 2 things. You need justice, but you also need love and mercy and compassion, forgiveness and understanding. Justice is a minimum, but justice is not enough. I don't disagree with that slogan. If you want peace, work for justice. But that's not the whole of it, and that's not the most important part of it. If you want peace, work for justice, and then go beyond justice too. Because justice alone isn't enough.
thank you.
Yeah.
Dr. Kreeft, you touched on this earlier, but would you clarify your stance on the role that hell plays for both a just yet merciful God?
Oh boy. Well, let's change the question. Instead of the role hell plays in a theological scheme, I don't think you can justify hell in terms of the theological scheme. You know, God decides to create the world, and he says, okay, this is good, and this is good, and this is good, and there's going to be hell too. That's somehow not the right way to look at it. Let's change the question to, if God is totally just and totally merciful, how can there be a hell? Well, suppose you're God. You want to improve on his work. You want somehow to make no hell. Okay. First thing you do is not create anything. No problem. Right. Well, you want the creation. Okay, the universe is here. And everything in the universe is good. Plants, animals, supernovas. And then human beings. How are they different? They got free will. Okay. So you're God, you create them good. But you know that since they have free will, whether they're going to remain good is up to them, not to you. So do you give them free will or not? Do you make them just happy apes? Or do you make them free will? That's a chance. That's like, do you get married and have children, or do you become a photographer and take pictures of children? You can control those pictures, but you can't control the children. And the pictures are not going to disappoint you and act up, but the children might. All right? So if you say, if I were God, I wouldn't have created myself, you've just committed suicide, spiritually. You said it would have been better if humanity didn't exist. You don't want to say that. Okay. So he gives us free will. Now, he puts us in the garden, and everything's great, everything's beautiful. And if he only put up a sign saying no snake in the grass, there would be no temptation. Now, before the fall, Adam and Eve were human, and they had free will, but there was no opportunity for evil. There was no occasion of sin. Their love of God was not tested, and their faith was not tested. It was infantile. Now, you're going to let them grow up, or you're going to keep them infantile and happy? You could do that. You keep them in the Garden of Eden forever, and there'd be no sin, no suffering, no hell. But they'd be infants. And you have to do the same thing with their kids. They'd have kids, because the first commandment is be fruitful and multiply. And I don't think that meant grow orange trees and memorize the multiplication table. But you'd have to keep them in this little bubble. Would you do that? Would you be a better God if you did that? I don't think so. That's like a helicopter parent. Wants to protect the kids from growing up, to keep them innocent. All right. So you foresee that if you let them be tempted, one of two things will happen. Either they'll resist the temptation and become better and happier and stronger and more saintly, or they'll succumb to the temptation, and then disaster will happen. And you're going to have to pay a horrible price to get them out of that disaster. So what do? You let them grow at risk or not? Well, what does love do? What does a human parent do? Love. Okay? All right, now, you got people who are fallen, who are selfish, but you send prophets, especially the prophet called conscience, and you can't kill that prophet. You can kill the outer prophet. You can't kill the inner prophet. So people still have a moral compass, and they can choose good. And now you can give all sorts of supernatural helps to good. For instance, when something really evil starts to happen, like Hitler's about to be elected, you could arrange for a thunderbolt to hit him in the head and kill him on the night of the election. And that would save 6 million Jews and 55 million soldiers from World War II. All right, if you're going to use that policy, without taking away free will, you're just blocking all the effects of evil. When somebody tries to shoot somebody else, you miraculously turn that bullet to butter before it enters their body. Well, that's really taking away free will. I can't kill you if God stops it all the time. And I can't even have an evil thought if God miraculously intervenes by giving me a frontal lobotomy and preventing me from having an evil thought. So that takes away free will. So once you say, I'm going to create human beings with free will, you're risking the fall. And you foresee that that's going to happen. Was he right to do that? If you say yes, the next step is, well, now, what if they die in that state without repenting? What if they say to me with all their heart, the hell with you, I hate you? You can still take them to heaven, but they won't enjoy it. They'll be like an opera buff who goes to a rock concert. Everybody around him is in heaven, he's in hell. If you die in a state of hating God and hating goodness, you'll hate heaven. So in a sense, hell is a necessary consequence of free choice. I don't believe God puts anybody in hell. I think we put ourselves there. We jump in. But wait a minute. Here's the real problem. I think it's fairly easy to get God off the hook by that argument. But how about us? Don't you have to be crazy to jump into hell? To prefer hell to heaven? Darkness to light? Selfish misery to the joy of love and self-giving? Don't you have to be crazy to do that? Yeah, you do. And we do that all the time. We're crazy. Here's my proof of original sin. Every time you make a moral choice, God is appealing to your free will. The Godfather doesn't do that. He comes at you with one hand and he makes you an offer you can't refuse. God comes at you with two hands and says, choose. He makes you an offer you can refuse. That's the difference between God the Father and the Godfather. He says to you, in my right hand is the secret of joy. That is, my will. In my left hand is your secret of misery. Your will be done. So now, I say to you, in giving you free will, thy will be done. Do you reply back to me, thy will be done, God? In that case, you're choosing my right hand, and that's the secret of joy. If you say no, you're choosing my left hand, and that's the secret of misery. And now, I'll give you divine revelation to prove that, and I'll give you reason to prove that, and I'll give you thousands of experiences every day to prove that. Every single time you ever make a moral choice, the same thing happens over and over again. Every time you choose my right hand, you find joy deep down in the long run. And every time you choose my left hand, you find misery deep down in the long run. So now, what will you choose this time? And what's our response? Gee, God, that's a tough one. Gee, I don't know. It's tempting. Let me try the left hand. Maybe it'll work this time. We're insane. We're morally insane. Sin is insanity. Einstein said, insanity means doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result the next time. So, we're nuts. God loves us anyway. But if we die nuts, if we're so stupid that we refuse his love and his forgiveness, we don't have it. Now, I must say that argument, although I believe it, doesn't totally satisfy me because there are a lot of things I still don't understand. Couldn't God somehow do it in ways that I don't understand? Couldn't he somehow take away our free will at the last minute? And couldn't he somehow arrange for only saints to be born? I don't have all the answers. We just got to trust him. That's basically what he said to Job. And the supreme answer to the problem of evil, even the problem of hell, is Christ on the cross. That's God's answer. What does God think about evil? That's what he thinks about it. What does God think about suffering and death? Look at Jesus by Lazarus' bedside, by his graveside. He weeps.
Do you think that the Western theology put emphasis on the retributive aspect of justice, but then in the Eastern it's put heavy emphasis on the restorative aspect of justice? Do you agree with that, or?
They're both true. They're both in Catholic theology.
I'm a Eastern Catholic.
There's a natural emphasis. The West emphasizes reason more. The East emphasizes mysticism more. Women emphasize instinct more. Men emphasize analysis more. That's natural, as long as you don't deny the other thing. It's all together. And the only complete human being who ever lived who didn't emphasize one thing at the expense of the other was Jesus Christ. And we're all little parts of his body. So you can't expect an earlobe to do everything that a toenail does. But they don't contradict each other. They're part of the same organism. Yes.
Did you say that God's grace somehow takes away will?
Exactly the opposite. Exactly the opposite. Grace, since it loves nature, perfects nature. Divine revelation perfects our reason. Faith perfects our reason. And love perfects our feelings. And God's predestinating grace creates and uses and perfects our free will. God turns our free will on, not our free will off. So the more there is of God, the more divine grace there is in you, the freer you are, not the less free. I'm a lousy writer, so if I were to write, well, compared to Shakespeare, if I were to write a play called Julius Caesar, everybody would sound like a Boston philosophy professor. Okay? But Shakespeare's a genius. So he makes Caesar sound like Caesar, and Brutus sound like Brutus, and Antony sound like Antony. Well, he's closer to God than I am. God's the supreme artist. And the more divine grace and divine power there is, the freer and more individual human beings are. He's like light. Light is not one particular color that rivals all the other colors. If all light was blue, then white would look like light blue, and red would look like purple, and yellow would look like green. But light is colorless. It transcends all color, and therefore it perfects every color. The more light there is on red, the redder it is, and the more light there is on blue, the bluer it is. Well, light is like divine grace, and when it lights up human free will, each freedom and each individuality is maximized, not minimized. That's a basic Catholic principle. Do we have time for any more questions, or do we have to go? What?
Maybe one more? How about me? Okay.
I'm not tired, but...
Okay. If God loves and desires everyone to be saved, creates everyone in his own image, all of this is essential for Christianity.
Yeah.
People still choose hell.
Yeah.
But God is owed justice of being praised and loved forever and eternity. So, does hell pose a problem eternally of a lack of debt being paid in God's justice? Because there will be empty spots in heaven that were intended only for those great souls that were good and unique.
That's the toughest question of the night. I love tough questions. Not guaranteeing I can satisfy you with an answer. You're saying, how could you possibly be happy in heaven if somebody you really love is in hell?
No, how can God's justice still be satisfied if he is not praised by souls that were created to love him eternally?
Well, justice doesn't mean that... I guess it does. I was going to say justice doesn't mean we all have to praise him. And if some of us aren't going to be there, then we can't praise him because we're in hell. And therefore, justice isn't done. Well, cosmic justice isn't done, yeah. So isn't God the loser then? Well, that really comes down to my question. Doesn't that make God unhappy? Because perfect justice isn't done. He wants justice to be done. And part of justice is everybody loves him and praises him. And for eternity, justice is not done by the people in hell. They don't ever praise God. So, how does he solve that problem? I don't know. I'm not God. That's I'll push this a minute more. You're asking really a question about how God solves the problem of the justice owed to God. And I'm asking what I thought was a harder question, but now I realize it's a simpler question. Namely, how can human joy and happiness be compatible with anybody in hell? If you're in hell and you know your best friends, if you're in heaven and your best friend's in hell, how can you be happy? And that's a hard enough question. I think I've got an answer to that one, because that's a human question. But I don't really have a good answer to your question about God's consciousness. But my answer to the human question is, it can't be that God lies to you, or that God blinds your eyes. And it can't be that you simply don't care anymore. You don't love your friend anymore. That can't be. That's incompatible with being a saint. Okay? So you're in heaven and you still love the people that are in hell. So does God. Somehow it doesn't make him unhappy. I don't quite understand how, but maybe there's a clue. When somebody that you love on earth does something that is not only wicked but self-destructive, like becomes a drug addict or steals a car. Let's say somebody you love very deeply, your son or daughter does it, and you confront him, and you say, "How could you do this?" You're miserable. You're saying two things there because you love them. You're saying, "How could you do this to yourself?" You're hurting yourself. You're also saying, "How could you do this to me?" You're hurting me. Now, I think in heaven, God and we still do the first thing, but not the second thing. The second thing is passive, receptive. I'm under your power. You can hurt me because I love you. Love is vulnerable. If you don't want your heart ever broken, don't ever love anybody or anything. And if I love you and you mess up, that hurts me. I don't think that passivity is going to remain in hell. But I do think that the activity of love will remain in hell. I think just as in heaven, if God continues to love perfectly and actively everybody, even the ones in hell that don't return his love, that's like light shining out and finding no mirror, and it keeps going out into the darkness, and it finds only darkness, but it doesn't shut off, it keeps going out. So I think that's what our love will be like in heaven. Yes, we will continue to love these people. We won't stop loving them. But we won't be able to be conned by them. We won't be held hostage by them. We won't be like the mother whose little kid who can't have another cookie before dinner holds his breath until his face turns blue and makes his mother worried. "Oh, okay, you can have another cookie." We can't do that to God. Hell can't hold heaven hostage. Now, in this life, we can't really separate those two kinds of love, active love and passive love. And if we don't have passive love, we're cold fish and we don't have compassion at all. But I think in heaven, the two have to be separated. The active love will remain forever and it'll be perfect. But the kind of passive love that can be held hostage by other people's sufferings, that can't remain. Now, I don't have any clue as to what that looks like, to what the saints in heaven feel when they continue to love the people in hell, even though they know they're in hell and suffering. I couldn't do that. You couldn't do that. In our present state, we can't imagine that. But somehow, God solves the problem. Somehow, God can't be held hostage by us. He's not like mommy that we can make sweat because we hold our breath. I don't know how he does it, but he does it somehow, and he'll share that trick with us in heaven. So you just got to trust him there, too. There's a surprising amount of questions that I used to think, as a philosopher, there were perfectly rational answers to, if only I was smart enough. And now, the more I read the Bible, I see that there's an increasing number of questions or aspects of questions that we can't expect an answer to in this life. Like Job's questions. Job is a great philosopher. He had terrific questions. And does God answer on one of them? Not on one. Job, I didn't notice you sitting in the corner when I was creating the world, advising me how to do it. When the angels were singing the morning stars into existence, were you writing a script? Oh, I didn't notice you. Oh, you weren't there. Oh, okay, God, now I know who I am, and now I know who you are. That's about the best we can do.